One of the absolute best parts about being a pastor is the fact that I get to do weddings. I love coming to the times where I do premarital counseling with couples, and I say this to almost everybody. I have the best job ever. Think about it. I get to be a part of people's best day ever. So I've got a great gig, right? I love being a pastor on wedding days. And so do me a favor as we kind of get started today with the message. I want you to think about the best wedding that you've ever been a part of, the best wedding that you have ever seen, okay? Start thinking about the best wedding ever. And if you're a married couple in the room, then let me just talk to you for 1 second, because if your spouse asks you which wedding you were thinking of after the sermon, just repeat after me. Ours, honey. Go ahead. Ours, honey. Exactly, because that's the best wedding. Trust me, all right? Best wedding that you have ever been to, okay? So everybody, you're thinking about the best wedding ever, all right? Now let me ask you this question at all of our campuses, all right? Why was it the best wedding ever? What was it about it that made it the best wedding ever? Okay, maybe it was that one unforgettable moment in the ceremony. Maybe it was the reception. Right? Maybe it was the dancing after the ceremony. All right, maybe for you it was because it was the best people that you've been around. You're catching up with old friends. It was family members that you haven't seen for a long time. Maybe it was the food. Right? It was the best food that you have ever tasted. Or just in Western Pennsylvania, maybe it was the cookie table. Right? Right? I mean, you got your Buckeyes, you got your lady fingers. I mean, it was on point. The cookie table was on point. Why do we do that in Western Pennsylvania? It's the only place I've ever seen it. Anyway, all right. So, okay, everybody, you're thinking about that best wedding ever, all right? Maybe it was your brothers, maybe it was your friends. I'm not sure, all right? But I want you to just hold on to that memory for just 1 second, best wedding ever, and I'm going to come back to it in just 1 second. Okay, now today, we are in the second part of this series that we've entitled Afterlife. And so if you missed last week with Pastor Scott, I would highly encourage you to go back to that sermon, because what I'm going to do is build off of that sermon that he had last week. So go online and make sure that you hear that. But let me give some highlights just in case you missed last weekend. You might be here for the first time here today, and so I don't want you to be lost. So here are some highlights from his message. So Scott taught this, that everybody arrives at their beliefs about the afterlife from somewhere, right? So maybe you read an article, maybe you watched a TV show or a movie, maybe you even dug into it and you studied the world religion's perspectives on the afterlife, or maybe you just sort of thought of something on your own. But Scott last week, he asked us to consider what the central figure of Christianity, Jesus, what he taught about the afterlife, which is recorded in what we all know as the Bible, okay? This is a collection of ancient documents that has an awful lot to say about the afterlife. And so if you're here today and you're a Christian, which is many of us, right? We would believe that this is the source of truth about the afterlife, right? We would say that. But if you're here today and you're not a Christian, by the way, I just want to say welcome. Glad that you are here, because this is a really safe place for you to explore these types of things. So welcome. But let me just say this to you, okay? If you're not a Christian, what Pastor Scott, the point he was making last week was this, that we at least have to agree that the Bible is at least as good of a source as what you've studied, the movie that you saw, the TV show, the article that you read. It's as good as a source as what you've also studied. And we're not saying that to be condescending. We're just saying that simply because we need to consider all the sources on the topic. So here's what we're doing in this series at Northway, is that we are studying what Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, taught about this really important topic of the afterlife. In our study last week, it revealed 4 different things that he went over with us about the afterlife. And here's what Jesus taught, that at the moment that you die, you will go to one of 2 places. He was clear, either heaven or hell. That's what Jesus taught, right? And he said that you will be aware of your destination. As he told this parable, this story, he said, we're going to be aware of which destination we ended up in. And then he also made it very clear that you cannot change your destination once you get there. You can't request an accommodation change. However, we also learned this from Jesus, that we have a choice to make. In this life, it's not unfair, it's not random. The choice that we're going to make in this life is going to impact where we're going to end up in the afterlife. And then we talked about how Jesus, he referred to the realities of hell and how it is a hopeless and awful place. And then he also referred to the realities of heaven, which is where I'm going to be spending the majority of my time here today. So everybody, you're still thinking about that wedding, right? Okay. Best wedding that you've ever been a part of. Okay. Why was it the best wedding you've ever been a part of? So think about that wedding. Did you know that that's what Jesus referred to heaven about? As a wedding celebration. That's how Jesus referred to heaven. Recorded in Matthew 22, we have Jesus' words on this topic, and he explains it like this. So he tells another parable in this moment, and he says this: the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast. But look at this, they would not come. So again, he sent other servants saying, tell those who are invited, see, I've prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fat calves have been slaughtered. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. So Jesus paints this incredible picture of what heaven is going to be like in the afterlife by saying that God's going to throw a massive wedding party for all of us. So he's saying he wants everybody to be invited to it. He desires that all of his kids be there to share in this moment. But did you catch something in there? Some refused to come. Some chose not to come. So did you see that God reached out again? He reached out again to everybody and he says, hey, everything's ready. Come on, it's here. You know, I want all of you to be a part of this. And the imagery that Jesus is using here by talking about this wedding feast is the imagery of community with all those people who love God. Think about it, the wedding table or sitting around at the reception, enjoying each other, laughing, celebrating in that moment. The imagery he's using is laughing and dancing, eating all together at the table, doing life together with each other. But as we said last week, you and I have a choice in this life of how we're going to RSVP to this wedding celebration. And Jesus makes it clear here as he tells this story that some will say yes and some will say no. So how did Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, tell us what heaven is going to be like? He said it's going to be like a wedding celebration, better than you have ever imagined. Better than the one that's in your mind right now. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But that's not the only thing that he used to describe what heaven would be like. Another time, we see where the ancient writer, his name is Luke. He's a doctor. He's a historian. And Luke, he wrote about Jesus' crucifixion. And he told us that Jesus was crucified in the middle of two criminals, two thieves. So here we have these two thieves are railing on Jesus with their words, as all three of them are hanging on the cross. And they said things like this: if you really are the Son of God, then save yourself. And by the way, save us. That'd be good too, right? So they don't really believe that Jesus is who he said he was. So they're sort of, pushing him. They're prodding him to prove himself to them. They're kind of trash talking him in this moment. But then Luke records this very interesting conversation that takes place between one of these thieves and Jesus, because it seems as though that this guy begins to have a bit of a change of heart as it pertains to Jesus. See, something's going on in his final minutes, the final hours of his life, and he begins to look at Jesus differently. Look at this, recorded by Luke, this conversation. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But look at this. The other rebuked him, saying, "Man, do you not fear God? Since you're under the same sentence of condemnation, and we deserve it, we indeed justly, for we're receiving the due reward for our deeds. But this man, Jesus, he's done nothing wrong." And then he said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." See, now here's the thing. All of us, I bet you that you would think of this guy, that certainly the thief, the criminal, that this guy deserves hell, right? I mean, even in the video that we saw last week, a lot of people in this world, they believe that if you do good things, you get heaven. And if you do bad things, you pretty much deserve hell, right? And so you might be thinking, well, this guy deserves hell because of his past. I mean, he's a criminal. He's a thief. He's crucified on a cross like that. But I want you to remember what we learned last week. Do you remember this? We all deserve hell. Remember, heaven is for perfect people. And if you got in, then you would contaminate the whole place. Same with me. None of us are perfect. So we all deserve hell. So Jesus is sort of flipping the script here because he sees something that's happening in this man. He sees some attitude change towards you. He sees this guy actually come to his defense. And look at what Jesus says to this man. And he said, "Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." That guy, he got in. He doesn't deserve it, just like you and I don't. See, the imagery that Jesus uses here to describe what heaven will be like is the word paradise. I don't know what comes to your mind when you hear the word paradise. I know what comes to my mind, right? You might be thinking right now, ooh, yeah, the skiing, For some of you, you're saying, ooh, I know what I think about paradise, white sandy beaches, palm trees, bluest water that you've ever seen. I don't know what comes to your mind, but let me just tell you what Jesus is referring to here when he explains paradise. When he says paradise, he's reaching with his words all the way back to the original paradise of the Garden of Eden. And see, this is such a beautiful place that we can't even imagine. It's a beautiful place of unity. It's a beautiful place of just so much harmony and peace amongst God. See, it's unbroken relationship between God and man. It's this beautiful, undescribable place of lavish food. A place where we see that they had rest-filled and meaningful work. Harmony between humanity, peace amongst people. And Jesus said, at the moment that this guy dies, that's where he'll be with Jesus in paradise. Why? Because he turned his affection to Jesus. He turned his heart, he turned his mind, and he would now experience eternal life with God forever in paradise. So catch this now, okay? With just these two images that Jesus described heaven in. I could be here all day and explain to you all that Jesus said about heaven, but it'd take way too long. So with just these two images, we can come to a conclusion, if you're taking notes with me today, that heaven is like a wedding celebration in paradise with God and others who accept his invitation. See, this is God's desire for all humanity, right? Jesus extends the invitation to everyone. Eternal life to all people by dying on the cross and rising again from the grave. He made a way for all of us to be at the celebration in paradise. Does that not sound amazing to you? Sounds amazing to me, a wedding celebration. So much fun with God and all those people who believe in him as well. Now, friends, listen, is that all that heaven's gonna be like? Are we just gonna be like chubby angels on a cloud playing harps, right? I mean, think about it. Are we gonna just be eating like champs all day, and doing the Cupid shuffle at the reception? No, that's not what it's gonna be like. But listen, this is for a different sermon someday, but I don't have time to explain to you all that there is to know about heaven. I don't have the time to tell you that we are going to be working in heaven, but it's going to be meaningful and you're going to be passionate about it because you're going to be on mission. See, I don't have time to tell you that we're going to be worshiping God together. We're going to be interacting with the animals, right? The lion will lay down with the lamb. We're going to be interacting with the animal kingdom. We will listen to music together. We're going to laugh a lot. We ourselves, catch this, we're going to be creating new things. And check this out. We are going to rule and reign with Christ in paradise. But that's for another sermon. So, see, it sounds so good, doesn't it? It sounds so good, heaven. But many still decline the invitation. See, many people think if my goodies outweigh my baddies, God will be lenient. See, a lot of people think that if I just treat people nice, then God's going to let me slide in at the end. Many people will say that, you know what? It actually does sound too good to be true, so I'm going to decline the invitation. I don't believe it. See, some people who even believe and they accept Jesus' invitation, they're still anxious about going there, right? It's not that they wouldn't want to go to be in paradise with God. It's just the whole dying part here that causes us anxiousness and fear, right? You might ask questions like this, well, what about my family and my friends who are still going to be left here? What about all the things that I've worked for in this life, the house, the car, the whatever? Who's going to get it? I can't take it with me. See, it's not that we wouldn't want to be with God in heaven because that sounds so good. It's just the whole dying part here that causes us fear. So I want to introduce you to my friend, Ted Passano. He and his wife, Ruth, they moved to Wexford about a year ago and they started attending Northway. And when he heard that we were going to be doing this Afterlife series, he said, you have to hear my story. So I sat down with him at Starbucks and I heard his story. And I think you really want to hear it. Take a look. Ted started out his career as a police officer in Detroit in the mid-1970s. In the summer of 1976, he experienced something that is every parent's, spouse's, and child's worst nightmare. Ted was shot in the line of duty. He and his partner were called to a scene of a domestic disturbance that had turned violent. As they tried to calm the suspect down, it became obvious that he might do more damage to the now growing crowd. The officers developed a plan to apprehend the suspect peaceably, but the suspect erupted in more violence and now turned his attention to hurt Ted. In the altercation, Ted was shot. He described to me in much further detail the events and the chaos of that moment as he laid there knowing he was wounded and thinking that this could be his last day on earth. What were you thinking about? What were you feeling in that moment?
I'm lying on the ground. There's, a lot of yelling going on. Orders are being yelled. Police radios are crackling. I can hear sirens bringing in, more ambulances are coming in and so on to deal with all of this. I look over to my right and there's Jack being worked on and he is not looking good. And it's just, the best way I can describe it is chaos. My thoughts immediately went to my family. And I thought, I've got a young wife. I've got a 3-year-old son. I've got a 3-month-old daughter. I was planning on raising them and providing for them and protecting them and doing all the thing a husband and father does. And all of a sudden, I may not be able to do that.
A lot of people wonder in that moment what it's like to be on the brink of the afterlife. So what were you beginning to think about God, about, the afterlife yourself? What was going through your mind as far as the spiritual side of that conversation?
In my desperation, I did the only thing I could do. I called out to God. And Kent, at that moment, the peace of God filled me in a way that I had never experienced before, and I've never experienced since. It went from absolute chaos to absolute peace, and nothing had changed externally.
Yeah, but it was still a chaotic scene.
Absolutely, yeah. But everything had changed internally.
Right at that moment when you feel like maybe this is it, I am about to die. Did you have the confidence in that moment, the assurance that you were going to be with God in the afterlife?
That's the word, confidence. Yes, there was not the least bit of, there really wasn't the least bit of fear on my part at that point.
How has this moment that you've been describing to us, how has that impacted the way that you live the rest of your life?
I think everybody, of course, in their life has anxiety. And I have anxiety just like everybody else does. The anxiety I do not have is over when I die. With what I have experienced, with as close as I've come, I have found God to be true and faithful and dependable, and I don't believe there's anything scary over there.
Did you hear Ted's words? Peace in the midst of chaos, confidence that he would be with God if he died. He'd be in heaven. He said that he had nothing to fear. Now, of course, as any good husband and father, he was concerned about Ruth and the kids. You even saw him get a little bit emotional as, some 40 years later, still recounting the story. But he told me that he knew that God loved his wife and his kids more than he ever could. And he knew that they would be provided for by God. He trusted that. And because Ted had made a choice to have a relationship with God in this life by believing in and following Jesus prior to this moment of his near death, in the midst of that horrific scene, he was able to call out to God. And he had peace about his final destination. And he described that peace as an overwhelming peace that filled him right in that moment. And he said that he already knew that God was true, that he was faithful, and that he was dependable. And there was no reason for him to be afraid. Now, how did he know that? How could he be certain of that? Here's how. He had already been experiencing it in this life with God. See, the kind of peace and assurance and the lack of fear can only come when you have a relationship with God through his Son, Jesus Christ, and following him daily. See, friends, listen. Jesus never promised an afterlife. Jesus promised eternal life. And that begins right now, here, right here as we live here. See, Jesus is recorded as saying in John 10, he said this, I have come that they, that includes you and me, may have life and have it to the full. And he wasn't just talking about the afterlife when we die. He was talking about the now life when we live. See, there are some of us in the room today that we do not have peace in our lives. And it's because you haven't fully accepted Jesus' invitation to the life that he died for you to live. There are some of you that are here today that you don't have confidence in this life because you're not embracing the life that Jesus promised you to here and now. See, some of us, we don't have the assurance that we actually have a relationship with God in this life because we're not embracing the life that Jesus came here for. See, friends, we have to realize that at the moment that we accept the invitation, that we RSVP to that wedding, the moment we do that, heaven comes to earth in our life. And eternity begins now. for us. Life eternal because of Jesus being with us. Now, listen, does that mean that life is all sunshine and roses? No. Jesus promised this. In this world, we're going to have trouble. We live in a broken world, everybody. It's messed up. It's as jacked up as you are, right? We live in a broken world, but that's why God sent Jesus to fix this problem. When he ushered in the kingdom of heaven, even to broken people like you and me. See, he's here to fix the problem. And if we would accept the invitation to the wedding celebration and join him in his mission in this world, along with countless others who have gone before us in this life, to be a part of the solution of bringing heaven to earth. And we're going to be digging into that a lot more next weekend in part 3 of this series. Now, the word picture that Jesus is using here to help us understand what heaven is going to be like is a wedding celebration in paradise with God and with others who have accepted the invitation. And I know that there are many of us who are here today, including myself, that you wonder about loved ones who have died. Right? I mean, where did they go? Will I get to be with them again? Will I get to see them again? And friends, I want to say this as sensitively as I possibly can, because the reality of this can sting all of us. Only if they said yes to the invitation of Jesus will you see them again. And for some of you here today who are uncertain about somebody that you loved and that RSVP that they had, did they have a relationship with God through Jesus? Let me just talk with you for 1 second. See, you in this life, you will never be certain here of what was in the heart and in the mind of that person in the last minutes, in the last seconds of their life here on earth. Right? You can't be sure here. Right? It's just like the thief on the cross. In his last minutes, in his last hours of his life, he turned his eyes to Jesus. And friends, we've got to hold on to God's grace in that moment that can reach into those final moments in ways that we can't comprehend on this world. See, in those moments of uncertainty for some of us, we have to hold on to the fact that God loves people so much that he keeps inviting them. He said, come on, even till their final breath. And you never know. That's the hope that we hold on to. For those of us here who are certain that our loved one believed in and followed Jesus, here's the truth. You will see them again in heaven if you believe in and follow Jesus with your life here. You can be certain of that. See, I cannot believe personally that next Sunday will be the 10-year anniversary of my wife Erica's father's death. 10 years. But here's the hope that we have as a family. That Diane, my mother-in-law, she's going to see Jim at the wedding celebration. Right? Erica, my wife, she's going to hug her dad again. My 2 older girls who knew him as Pappy when they were very little, they're going to see him again. And we're all going to get to introduce my youngest daughter, Ainsley, who never got to meet him here, but she will know him there. See, that's what we can hold on to. For those, why? Because all of us that I just mentioned have made a decision in this life to believe in and follow Jesus with every day of our lives. And we will be reunited with him again. See, that's a truth that we can hold on to today. See, friends, the earthly death of a believing loved one is not the end of our relationship with them. It's just simply an interruption. right? We have not lost them because we know where they are. See, they are experiencing the joy of Jesus' presence in a place that he called paradise. And so that's a good thing for them, right? And one day we're going to be reunited with them. We know that from the Apostle Paul, his teaching, that we'll be brought back together in this magnificent reunion where it says this in 1 Thessalonians, we'll be with the Lord forever, all of us. So therefore, we need to encourage each other with those words. See, many people wonder if we'll be reunited with those who have gone before us. Will we recognize them? Will we recognize our loved ones in heaven? Scripture nowhere suggests that somehow there's a memory wipe from this life to the next. So we will recognize our loved ones. In fact, if we wouldn't know our loved ones, then what Paul taught is not a comfort at all to any of us. Wouldn't be a comfort. See, know this, being with Jesus will be the greatest joy of heaven. The second greatest joy of heaven will be doing that with Jesus, with the other people who have also accepted the invitation of Jesus to the wedding celebration. Now think about this for just 1 second. Use your imagination. Those who have gone before us, knowing what they know now, think about it. The great cloud of witnesses that's talked about in Hebrews. Picture this. They're peering over the balcony of heaven. And they're cheering us on in this life, saying, don't give up the good fight that is life, because life for those who believe in Jesus never ends. It's with him forever in paradise, and also with those who also believed in his message and followed him. So how can you have peace in this life about the afterlife? Simply, you need to RSVP to the wedding celebration by believing in and following Jesus with your entire life. So I'm going to ask that you stand with me at all of our campuses. I'm going to hand things over to your campus pastor.